Life can feel overwhelming at times, can't it? The weight of responsibilities, the never-ending demands of work, family, and everything in between. Some days, it feels like you're just barely keeping your head above water, trying to make sense of the chaos and longing for a break from the constant strain. You've worked hard, done what was expected of you, yet there's this nagging sense of emptiness, like you're running in place, never quite reaching the finish line. Maybe you've even wondered, is this all there is? But what if I told you that the very struggles you're facing, the battles that feel like they're too much to bear, are not in vain? What if I told you that every hardship, every moment of doubt, every tear you've shed is part of a divine plan that's preparing you for something bigger? You see, there's more to your story than meets the eye. Those struggles, they're not a sign of failure. They're shaping you, refining you, and getting you ready to rise into a purpose greater than you can imagine. For years, you've tried to fit into the mold that society, family, and even your own expectations have set for you. The American dream has told you to work hard, be successful, and follow the traditional path laid before you. But what happens when that path doesn't fulfill you? What happens when you're doing everything you were taught to do, and yet something still feels missing? It's like you're living someone else's life, not your own. You're being pushed, pulled, and worn thin, but you're still not where you want to be. If this resonates with you, you're not alone. In fact, you're likely at the edge of a breakthrough, a shift that will change everything. Your struggles are not random. They are the very things that have been preparing you for the life you were always meant to live.
You may not see it now, but every challenge, every failure, every moment of doubt has been refining you for something greater. The storm you're walking through right now is not the end. It's the beginning of a new chapter, one where you'll finally step into the destiny you've been called to. I want you to take a moment and really think about this. What if your current struggles are the very things that are shaping your strength, your resilience, and your faith? What if all the difficulties you've faced so far are not just obstacles, but stepping stones that have been laid out in front of you to lead you to your purpose? What if this moment, right here, right now, is the turning point? The moment where you decide to embrace the shift and rise to something bigger than you ever dreamed possible. I believe it's time for you to embrace that shift. The struggles you've endured, the pain you've carried, are not in vain.
They are preparing you for a life of purpose, a life where you no longer feel lost, but empowered, knowing you are walking the path you were always meant to walk. Now is the time to rise. It's time to embrace your divine purpose. Let go of the fear, the doubt, and the limitations you've placed on yourself. You were made for more. If you're ready to embrace this truth, to step into the calling that's been waiting for you, I encourage you to take that first step today. Like this message if it speaks to you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And let's walk together into this new chapter. Your struggles are shaping you, and your breakthrough is coming. Now is the time to rise. George Miller had never been one to question his path. At 52, he had built a life that, on the surface, many would envy. He had worked for the same construction company for 30 years, had a decent house in a quiet neighborhood just outside Chicago, and provided for his family with what he thought was steady, reliable work. His wife, Carol, was the love of his life, and their two kids, Emily and Jake, were growing into the kind of people any parent would be proud of. But somewhere, deep down, George knew something was missing. His work life had become a routine. Wake up at 5:30 a.m., grab a quick breakfast, head to the job site by 7, and work until dark. Every day was the same, each task a continuation of the one before. He did it because he had to, and because he had always done it. The paychecks were reliable, the work steady. But with each passing year, George felt less and less connected to the man he had been when he started this journey all those years ago.
It was at a particularly low point that he had begun to reflect on his life. George had been laid off after a sudden company-wide downsizing, a reality that had hit him harder than he expected. He wasn't prepared for this. He thought the job would always be there, that he would retire with the company, and that things would keep ticking along. But now, he found himself sitting on the couch, staring at the walls of his living room, unsure of his next move. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel the weight of what was happening. His whole life had been built on the belief that hard work and loyalty would lead to security. But here he was, after decades of dedication, facing a future that felt uncertain. George started questioning everything, his career, his faith, even his marriage. Was this really all there was to life? Had he made a mistake by always doing what was expected of him and not what truly lit a fire inside him? At night, George would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the deep ache in his chest. He had spent his whole life trying to be responsible, to fit into the mold that society had set for him. He had done everything right, got a job, got married, had kids, but he still felt like something was missing. He had been living for the paycheck, for the approval of others, not for himself. He wasn't living a life of purpose. He had been so focused on making sure everyone else was taken care of that he had forgotten about himself. Then came the night that changed everything. George had gone to church that evening, a regular Sunday habit he had been keeping for years, though it had started to feel more like a routine than a true spiritual practice. The service had been ordinary at first, an inspiring message about God's plan for your life, the usual comforting prayers, the same faces he had known for years. But that night, something in the pastor's words struck him like never before. The pastor spoke of trials, struggles, and hardships, not as burdens, but as preparations. God doesn't cause our struggles, the pastor said, but he uses them. Our pain is not pointless. It's refining us. It's preparing us for the purpose he has for us, a purpose that is greater than we can imagine. Those words stayed with George long after he left the church that night. Our pain is not pointless. The thought echoed in his mind, like a lifeline thrown to someone drowning. For the first time in years, George allowed himself to hope that his struggles, his disappointments, and his current situation might be leading to something greater. The next morning, he woke up with a new sense of purpose. It was as if a weight had been lifted off his chest. His struggles, which had once felt like an endless burden, began to feel different. They weren't just obstacles to endure, they were stepping stones, guiding him to something bigger. For the first time in his life, George started to see his struggles as part of God's plan. He began to understand that everything he had gone through, the long hours, the sacrifices, the frustrations, had been shaping him for something greater. George didn't know what that something greater was yet, but he was determined to find out. The doubt and the fear were still there, but now they were joined by a quiet, unwavering hope. The struggle was not in vain. His faith wasn't just a set of traditions. It was alive and guiding him, even through the hardest moments of his life. It was a turning point for George, one that would change the way he saw everything. He was not simply enduring his struggles anymore. He was embracing them. The shift George began to experience wasn't immediate, but it was real. He spent the following weeks diving deeper into his faith. He started praying more intentionally, asking God for guidance. He spent more time in quiet reflection, trying to listen for God's voice amidst the noise of everyday life. As the days went by, he began to see small signs of change. It wasn't that everything in his life suddenly fell into place, but George felt different. He didn't feel lost anymore. He felt like he was being prepared for something
something that required him to let go of his old way of living and embrace a new way of thinking. One evening, George sat down with his wife, Carol. They hadn't had a heart-to-heart conversation in a long time, but that night something felt different. They talked for hours about their past, their present, and their future. George opened up to her about what he had been feeling, about the shift that was happening within him. "I feel like I've been living someone else's life," he admitted. "Like I've been doing what was expected of me, but not what God has truly called me to do." Carol listened carefully, her eyes filled with understanding. She had always been supportive, but this was different. This wasn't just about the job or their family. This was about a shift in George's spirit, a deep, personal transformation that he couldn't ignore. "I think you're right," Carol said softly. "We've been so focused on what society tells us we should do, but maybe it's time for us to focus on what God wants us to do. It's not too late to change direction." That conversation was a breakthrough for George. It was the first time he truly realized that the shift he was experiencing wasn't just about his career or his external circumstances. It was about a deeper, spiritual shift, one that would redefine the way he lived his life. George started to explore new opportunities, but not in the way he had in the past. Instead of looking for a new job simply for security, he began to search for a path that aligned with his values, his faith, and his passion. He felt a calling to help others, to use his skills and experience to make a difference in his community. His heart began to open to possibilities he had never considered before. At the same time, George began to see his marriage with Carol in a new light. They started working together to reconnect, to build a life that was not just about surviving, but thriving. They talked openly about their dreams, their fears, and their hopes for the future. George realized that the struggles they had gone through in their marriage were not signs of failure. They were part of their journey, just like everything else. They had been prepared, together, for this next chapter of their lives. And so, with each passing day, George began to embrace the shift that had started within him. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt and fear, moments when he wondered if he was on the right path. But with each step, he grew stronger, more confident in his calling, and more certain that God was with him, guiding him every step of the way. His struggles, once a source of frustration and pain, had become the foundation of his transformation. And as George continued on his journey, he realized that the greatest gift he could give to himself, to Carol, and to his community was to embrace this shift fully and completely. The struggles hadn't broken him. They had prepared him for something greater. The story of George is a reflection of all of us. We all face struggles in life, whether it's in our careers, our relationships, or our personal growth. But what if those struggles are not just obstacles to overcome? What if they are part of a divine plan, a preparation for something greater? What if the very struggles you face today are shaping you into the person you were always meant to be? Like George, you have been chosen for something greater. Your struggles are not in vain. They are preparing you to rise, to embrace your true calling, and to step into the destiny God has set before you. Embrace the shift. It's time to rise. The quiet hum of the alarm clock sounded in the early morning stillness, rousing Sarah Johnson from her dreams. The sun hadn't quite risen yet, but she was already awake, staring at the ceiling above her bed in a room filled with the smell of stale coffee and worn-out dreams. It had been years since she felt truly awake, truly alive. Every day felt like the last, and each morning she fought the same battle with herself. "Do I really want to go in today?" she asked herself, knowing the answer long before her feet hit the floor. She had been stuck for what felt like an eternity. At 55, Sarah had built a comfortable life. Her husband, Tom, was a good man. They had 2 grown children, Emily and Jake, who had families of their own now. Their house was paid off, their bills were manageable, and on the outside, everything looked just fine. But when Sarah looked in the mirror, she didn't recognize the woman staring back.
She had been living for others, their expectations, their needs, their desires. But she had forgotten about herself. She had forgotten the spark that had once driven her, the passion she had once felt for the work she loved and the purpose she believed God had called her to. For years, Sarah had been putting everyone's needs before her own. She worked at a job she no longer cared about, a job that had once been her dream but had become nothing more than a paycheck. She had buried her desires, her hopes, and her true calling beneath the surface, convincing herself that it was easier to stay where it was comfortable. Every time she felt the pull to do something more, to reach for something greater, she pushed it down, afraid of the unknown. She didn't want to take risks, didn't want to make waves. Life was fine, and she had everything she needed. At least, that's what she told herself. But deep inside, Sarah knew she was suffocating. The weight of her unfulfilled dreams was heavy, and it was growing unbearable. The frustration, the loneliness, and the sense that something was missing had become almost too much to ignore. She had prayed, of course. She had gone to church, attended Bible studies, and talked about her faith. But somewhere along the way, she lost the connection she once had. The God she used to feel close to now felt distant, like a memory she couldn't quite touch. She had fallen into the trap of routine, the trap of life's demands, and she had allowed her faith to become a checkbox on her to-do list instead of the guiding force of her life. That all changed one chilly autumn morning when Sarah found herself sitting on the porch, sipping her coffee and staring out at the changing leaves. The trees outside her house were ablaze with color, a reminder of the beauty of change, even in the face of inevitable loss. For the first time in months, Sarah felt a deep, stirring sense of stillness inside her. She didn't know where it came from, but she felt it. This was no ordinary moment. She knew that God had been trying to get her attention for some time, but now, in the quiet of the morning, it felt as though he was finally speaking to her heart. "Sarah," the voice in her mind was clear, almost audible. "You've been walking through life, holding on to your fears and your doubts, but I am calling you to more. You are not meant to live in the shadows of others. Your struggles are preparing you for something greater. It's time to rise, to step into your purpose." The words hit Sarah with the force of a revelation. She felt tears well up in her eyes, not out of sadness, but from a deep sense of awakening. It's time to rise. She repeated the words in her mind, feeling them reverberate through her soul. For the first time in years, Sarah felt like she was being called back to life. The struggles she had faced, her frustrations, her fears, her disappointments, had not been for nothing. They had been the soil in which her new life was being nurtured. God had been preparing her all along, even when she couldn't see it. She sat there for a while, letting the truth sink in. It wasn't a loud, dramatic moment. It wasn't a sudden burst of revelation. It was a quiet knowing, a deep sense of peace that told her everything would be okay. She didn't need to have all the answers right now. She didn't need to understand exactly how it would all unfold. All she needed to do was take that first step. The shift had begun, and it was time for her to embrace it. The next few days felt different. Sarah began to make small changes in her life, each one a step toward embracing the shift that had been waiting for her. The first step was simple. She started by setting aside more time for prayer. She began to talk to God as though he was sitting across from her, sharing her hopes, her fears, and her desires. She didn't worry about what was proper or correct. She just spoke from her heart. Slowly, she felt a reconnection with her faith, a deepening of her relationship with God that she'd been missing for so long.
Sarah also began to evaluate her career. She had spent over 30 years in her job, but the passion she once had long since faded. She knew she couldn't keep going in the same direction, but the thought of change terrified her. What would people think? Could she really take that leap? The doubts crept in, as they always did. But this time, Sarah felt stronger. She knew the fear was a natural part of the process. It wasn't a sign to stop. It was a sign to move forward in faith. She made a decision she would leave her job. It wasn't a rash decision, but one she had been contemplating for months. It wasn't that she hated her job. It was just that it no longer aligned with her calling. She wanted to make a difference, to use her gifts and talents in a way that served God and others.
She didn't know exactly what that looked like, but she trusted that God would guide her. Sarah's first step was to reach out to a career counselor who specialized in helping people transition to new fields. The conversation was eye-opening. Sarah realized that she had spent so many years living for others' expectations that she had never truly thought about what she wanted to do, what she was truly passionate about. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to dream. She wanted to work with young women, helping them navigate the challenges of life, faith, and identity. She wanted to make an impact, to be a mentor, to help others see the strength that God had placed inside them, just as He had revealed that strength to her. As the weeks went by, Sarah continued to lean into the shift. She found a new sense of purpose, and her faith grew stronger every day. She wasn't sure how everything would work out, but she knew that God was with her. The doubts still appeared from time to time, but she didn't let them hold her back. She knew that the struggles she had faced were not signs of failure, but of preparation. They had shaped her, refined her, and helped her become the person she was always meant to be. Sarah's transformation wasn't just about leaving her job. It was about embracing the life God had always wanted for her. The shift was happening in her heart, her mind, and her spirit. She had spent years living for the expectations of others, but now she was learning to live for herself, for the calling God had placed on her life. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. And as Sarah stood on the precipice of this new chapter, she realized that her struggles had not been in vain. They had been the very things that had prepared her to rise. She had embraced the shift, and now she was ready to step into the purpose that had been waiting for her all along. This is the story of Sarah, but it could be your story too. The struggles you face, the challenges you endure, the fears you carry, they are not in vain. They are part of the process that is preparing you for something greater. Embrace the shift. God is calling you to rise, and the journey you've been through is shaping you into the person you were always meant to be. The best is yet to come. Embrace it. Step into it. You are being prepared for something bigger than you can imagine. Your purpose is just beginning. John Parker sat at his kitchen table, staring at the mug in his hands as the morning light filtered through the window, casting soft shadows across the room. He had always prided himself on being a practical man. For years, he had built a life by making careful decisions, weighing each step, and ensuring that everything was in its place. His job at the auto repair shop was steady. His wife, Linda, was supportive, and his kids, Tim and Sarah, were growing up in the comfort he had worked so hard to provide. But something had changed. His life, which once felt fulfilling and certain, now seemed like a routine he couldn't escape. He had spent the past 25 years building this life, and for the first time in a long time, John was beginning to feel disconnected from it. His job, though it paid the bills, no longer gave him the satisfaction it once did. Linda, his high school sweetheart, had been worried too, noticing how tired he had become, not just physically, but emotionally. The conversations had grown sparse, often revolving around the kids, household chores, and the mundanities of daily life. But there was something deeper, something
unspoken between them that neither of them could quite articulate.
John had always been a man of faith, attending church every Sunday, saying his prayers at night. But over the years, his relationship with God had become strained. It wasn't that he didn't believe, it was that he couldn't feel God's presence in his life anymore. It was as if the connection he once had with his faith had dimmed, replaced by a sense of stagnation and disillusionment. And yet, deep inside, he knew something had to change. The weight of his struggles, the frustration he felt with his job, the disconnect in his marriage, and the unfulfilled dreams tugged at him every single day. But the hardest part of it all wasn't the weight of his current situation, it was the fear of change. John had always been afraid of taking risks, of stepping into the unknown. Change was something he avoided, especially if it meant stepping out of his comfort zone. His entire life had been built on stability, routine, and security.
But now, everything felt like it was slipping away, and he couldn't ignore the nagging voice that kept telling him that something bigger was waiting for him. One night, after another exhausting day at the shop, John found himself in the quiet of his living room, his mind racing. He couldn't sleep, couldn't turn off the thoughts that kept swirling in his head. He felt a longing for something more, something beyond the life he had built. It was in that stillness that he heard the voice, not audibly, but deep within his heart. It was a voice that he had heard before but had ignored for so long. John, you are not meant to live in this way. Your struggles have been preparing you for something greater. It's time to embrace the shift. John sat up straight, his heart racing. He knew these words weren't just his own thoughts. They were something more, something divine. He had heard that still, small voice many times throughout his life, but he had always dismissed it. It was easy to ignore, easier to stick to the path he had already laid out for himself. But now, everything had changed. The voice was clear, direct, and filled with a sense of urgency that John could not deny. It wasn't the first time he had felt this sense of divine calling. As a child, he had felt God's presence in the small moments, the quiet prayers before bed, the way the sun would shine through the trees during his Sunday morning walks with his parents. But somewhere along the way, life had become about surviving, not thriving. His faith had become a Sunday ritual, something he did because it was expected, not because he felt it deep in his soul. The truth hit John hard that night. He wasn't just struggling because of external factors, his job, his marriage, the pressures of life. His struggles were part of a much bigger story. They were not obstacles to overcome, but stepping stones guiding him toward a greater purpose. The pain, the frustration, and the doubt were all part of the process. They had been preparing him for something bigger, something beyond his understanding. John lay back on the couch, his mind racing, but also filled with a deep sense of peace. The weight of his struggles didn't feel so heavy anymore. It was as if the burden had been lifted. The fear of change no longer seemed so daunting. He realized that the struggles he had been facing were not random. They were divinely ordained to shape him, to refine him, and to prepare him for the purpose God had for him. It wasn't about the comfort he had grown accustomed to. It was about stepping into the unknown, trusting that God was leading him to something greater. The next morning, as John sat with his family at the breakfast table, the weight of his decision still hung over him. He didn't know exactly what the future held, but he knew that he had to make a change. He couldn't keep living in the same way, stuck in the same cycle of fear and complacency. He had to embrace the shift that was calling him, no matter how difficult it might be. His wife, Linda, noticed the shift in him too. She had always known that John had more to offer than just a steady job at the auto repair shop. She had seen the way he lit up when he talked about his passions, about helping others, about doing something that made a difference. But she had also seen the fear in his eyes when it came to stepping out of his comfort zone. She had supported him for years, but now
she was ready to support him in a different way. She knew that the shift wasn't just about him, it was about them. It was about their future together, about stepping into a new chapter of their lives. As the days passed, John began to make changes. He started small. He reached out to an old friend who was a mentor in the community and asked for advice.
He began to explore the possibility of starting his own business, something that had always been in the back of his mind, but had seemed too risky to pursue. He prayed, asking for guidance and strength, and with each day, he felt more confident in his decision. The doubts still came, they always did, but this time, John faced them head-on. He realized that the fear wasn't a sign to stop, it was a sign to keep going, to trust in God's plan, and know that he wasn't walking this path alone. With each step, he felt God's presence, leading him forward, urging him to embrace the shift with courage and faith. The shift that John experienced wasn't just about his career, it was about his entire life, the way he saw himself, his faith, his marriage, and his relationship with God. As he began to walk in faith, he saw God working in ways he hadn't expected. Opportunities began to open up. Doors that had once seemed closed now seemed to swing wide open.
It wasn't all smooth sailing. There were still moments of doubt, moments when the fear crept back in. But John was different now. He had a new sense of purpose, a new sense of identity. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was living. John's marriage with Linda began to flourish as well. They had always loved each other, but now they were partners in a new way. They shared their dreams, their fears, and their hopes for the future. Linda supported him in his decision to step out of his comfort zone, and John found a new respect for her strength. They were in this together, walking side by side toward the life they had always dreamed of, but had been too afraid to pursue. Their relationship had been tested over the years, but now it felt stronger than ever. John knew that the struggles he had faced, the doubts, the disappointments, the fears, had been a necessary part of the process. They had refined him, prepared him, and brought him to this point.
And now, as he looked toward the future, he saw a life filled with possibilities. He had embraced the shift, and he was finally stepping into the purpose that God had always intended for him. This journey is not just John's, it is all of ours. We all face struggles, challenges, and doubts that threaten to hold us back. But what if those struggles are not obstacles, but stepping stones leading us to something greater? What if the very difficulties you face are the things God is using to prepare you for your purpose? It's time to embrace the shift. Trust that your struggles are not in vain and that the life you've been longing for is waiting for you on the other side of your fears. Rise, chosen one. The shift is happening, and your purpose is calling you forward.